Algorithms are finicky bastards, and so even if you're subscribed to me, even if you've clicked the bell and gone through all the other rigmarole, even if you follow me on social media, you might not see what I'm up to. So I have a mailing list. Postmortem-studios-fan-group, which is a bit of a mouthful, but all you have to do is navigate your way there once at groups.google.com and subscribe, and then once a month you will get an email with everything that I've done in the previous month, and isn't that special? Hello lovelies. Journeys through the Radiant Citadel, a new person of colour only project has been announced by Wizards, similar to their sort of portfolio of adventures they did for Candlekeep. And Radiant Citadel promises to do for race relations exactly what Candlekeep did for relations between the disabled community and the broader community, which is to say it's going to end up horribly patronising and entrenching bigotry towards disabled people and alienating most of the broader audience, but this time for race. Now, I'm sure there are right-wing people objecting to this project on various racist grounds, and fuck those people, but there are also principled, meaningful objections to this kind of project from the left, people like me, namely that this is an horrendously racist project that doesn't advance but rather sets back race relations and ignores the history of the hobby and makes it out to be racist in a way that it never has been. So I shall now explain, as to a child, because that's apparently necessary, what those objections are and what they are rooted in. And please, as I do this, keep in mind that I, personally, fit into several oppressed identity categories that could benefit from this current trend of benevolent bigotry and selling papal indulgences to sinners. But I object because I have principles and because they're consistent. In this case, the principle that racism is bad. Alright, so first I think it's important to define what racism is. And I'm well aware that a lot of you have created your own definitions which conveniently excuse your own racism by saying that racism is prejudice plus power. But no, that is not the definition of racism at all, or as understood by most people. Racism is prejudice on the basis of race, and sexism is prejudice on the basis of sex. I've done other videos going into great detail why attempts to fallaciously redefine the term don't hold water or don't compare to things that happen in the real world. You can go and watch those if you need to, but you need to understand that from my point of view, coming from the left, and from most other people's point of view in general society, racism is any prejudice towards anyone on the basis of their race, no matter what the race is, no matter what the power differential is. That can only make things worse. It doesn't mean they're not racism. Okay. So 2. Why is racism bad? Well, at root, it's the same reason that any form of prejudice is bad, in that you are prejudging someone based on something about their identity or appearance or whatever else that makes no actual difference whatsoever in terms of their potential capability, of their humanity. It makes no odds to any of that. So it's bad because it's categorizing and limiting people in terms of a superficial, meaningless thing about them. So being black doesn't really mean anything, being white doesn't really mean anything except the meaning that we assign to it, and a lot of people assign negative meanings to these things prejudicially. The idea that, for example, ironically enough, that only white people can be racist is a deeply racist statement, or the idea that black people are inherently lower IQ or more prone to violence or more prone to crime or whatever else. These are both forms of racism, and it's bad because it leads you to prejudge the person rather than taking them as an individual on a case-by-case basis and getting to know them and understand them, what they believe and why, what their circumstances are, and so on. It's a knee-jerk prejudicial movement that is rarely correct. So that's why racism is bad. It can exclude people, it can harm them on the basis of your prejudice. Now, there isn't just one form of racism. I think we're all well acquainted with the kind of stereotypical racism that you might see in a skinhead, for example, expressing their hatred of the Jews or blacks or whatever, and regarding them as inferior and so on. That's a more explicit form of racism, but there are other forms of racism. Now, I'm not talking about things where nobody involved is actually racially prejudiced, but then you come up with differential outcomes. Usually that's to do with other factors like wealth and class and so on, but I digress. I would say the two main forms of racism are the kind of overt hostile racism and what some people call the soft bigotry of low expectations. That, these poor people, they need a leg up, they need extra assistance, they're not as capable as everyone else for some reason. That kind of racism is still racism. What's interesting about this kind of benevolent racism is that when you remove benevolent isms, the people who are having those benevolent isms removed from them often perceive that removal of benevolent prejudice as an example of overt prejudice. I've seen studies on this to do with sexism, not so much to do with race, but it does seem that when you treat people equally after a long time of babying them or giving them special privileges, I don't agree with the use of that word, but I'm trying to speak your language. Yeah, this kind of explains a lot of perceived racism and other bigotry where there isn't necessarily any there. Rather, it's being removed, but being perceived as racist or sexist or whatever else. So how is the policy behind this project racist? I mean, to me, it seems pretty obvious. When you say, this is a POC-only project, no white people have been involved, well, obviously, thereby you are excluding Caucasians and related ethnic subcategories, and by excluding them, you're engaged in prejudicial and racist behaviour. By only including black and brown people, you are being also explicitly racist. If we turn this around, it becomes obvious for some reason. I don't know why the other way around isn't as obvious either. If Wizards of the Coast were to put out a compilation of adventures all written by white people, or all written by men, or all written by able-bodied people, I don't think anyone would have the same kind of issue in noticing that this was prejudicial and having a problem with it. But for some reason, this way around, they can't see that it is exactly the same thing. Yeah, if you have a pub sign that says no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, it's pretty obvious that that's racist. But if you have a project up saying no cisgenders, no heterosexuals, no whites, for some reason people's brains short circuit and they can no longer understand what's going on there. By creating a person of colour only project, not only are you being explicitly and exclusionarily bigoted and prejudiced towards white people, you're also being benevolently racist towards people of colour, saying the only way you can succeed at all is if we make a special category that only includes you and excludes everyone else. You can't compete on equal terms. There, have a cookie, right? This is the problem in both ways. It is simultaneously both racist towards white people by excluding them and racist towards black and minority ethnic people by patting them on the head and giving them good boy cookies, right? And elevating them possibly beyond their actual talent or capability on the basis of an immutable characteristic that is meaningless, except the meaning that we give it, which in this instance is a rather racist one. Now, besides racism being bad, just as it is, what are the second and third order negative consequences here? Like, I can kind of understand why someone might be bamboozled into thinking, oh, this is a good thing. It's compensating for decades of prejudice that never really existed in the role-playing community, but let's just ignore that. But then you need to think deeper, right? What message does this send to black and minority ethnic creators within the community? Oh, you need a special leg up. You can't compete unless we bias everything in your favour, right? Or that the only meaningful or useful thing about you is your ethnicity, nothing else, not your talent, not your capability. Just the fact that you tick the right box. That's what makes you have value to Wizards of the Coast or the role-playing industry in general, or this kind of aggressive woke scold marketing where you're basically selling papal indulgences to people. Here, buy this product, it's by an oppressed category, thereby you can salve your conscience for things we've given you guilt trips over that you should have had guilt trips over in the first place. Right, so there's that aspect. It is discouraging, it is patronising, it is infantilizing to the very people that it claims to be wanting to help. Then you have to consider the knock-on effect on the majority of the gaming community, which is and remains, whether you regard that as a good or a bad thing or a neutral thing, as I do, it remains a fact that the majority of the audience is white, male, middle-aged, frankly, these days. And what does this do to them? It tells them that your talent, your capability, the amount of love and effort that you have put into these games and into your products doesn't matter, you're the wrong colour, right? And that kind of thing breeds resentment, which is why I will always favour class analysis over race analysis. Class war, not race war. This kind of dichotomy, this kind of prejudice deepens and increases racism by creating resentment and a sense that things are unfair in that larger community full of people that you need to win over to your cause if you genuinely want to make change. So it's not just immediately racist, it makes the problem worse. Now, like it or not, in the 90s we had a very different approach to the issue of race. That it was irrelevant, that it didn't mean anything, that we would try our best to treat everyone equally and fairly regardless of things like race. And I think you have to look around and ask yourself, has this woke scold approach actually made things any better? Or are race relations worse than they were in the 90s? To me, it doesn't seem like there's any question that things are worse. But what has changed? The activism has changed. It has become more screeching. It has become everything that it used to be against. Openly racist, openly sexist, openly biased when it comes to gender presentation or sexuality. Right? It has become hypocritical, and it's hard to convince people to embrace unfairness, which is what you do when you engage in projects like this, rather than embracing fairness. Right? A better world, a non-racist world, is not one where everyone is reduced to their identity and given a strict allotment based on that identity, but one rather where that identity is completely irrelevant, and what it is that you can do, your talent, your capability, and meritocracy is what creates genuine equality. But it seems to me that is slipping through our grasp and falling away. Alright, so what would be the best path forward? Well, to treat everyone the same, to have open calls, to choose people on the basis of talent and capability, not on the basis of their identity category. That is the way forward. The thing that we used to say was the way forward. That thing when these kind of relationships and issues were a lot better than they are today. You know, that shit that worked and was working until it got sabotaged. Fairness and equality is a much easier sell than saying we should just give these people privileges because of their colour or their sexuality or what they like to rub their genitals against. Right? That is continuing the problem. That is simply inverting the hierarchy rather than getting rid of the hierarchy. Maybe this isn't explained as to a child, but hopefully it is a more rounded and full explanation as to how people like me, very much embedded in the far left, see this kind of shit as eye-rollingly, self-sabotagingly stupid. Zang.
The Atomic Age, with its A-bombs, transistorized radios, jet engines, and a new breed of dangerous supervillain, requires heroes to face the challenge. That's where you come in. The world needs you, Agent. Agent of Swing.